This episode of the podcast is brought to you by New Bloom Labs.
There are many testing labs out there that claim that they can resolve the various THC molecules, but most overpromise and underdeliver. That's why I always recommend talking to the team at New Bloom Labs. New Bloom Labs delivers the most comprehensive potency analysis there is by leading the industry with potency testing of Delta 8, Delta 9, 2 isomers of Delta 10, and a dozen other major and minor cannabinoids that are shaping the industry. And did I mention that they have the best turnaround time in the industry? That's right. They always provide next business day turnaround on potency tests and 1 to 2 business turnaround on terpene profiles and screenings for heavy metals, pesticides, residual solvents, and mycotoxins. Give them a call today at 844-TEST-CBD or visit their website at newbloomlabs.com. Superior science, rapid results, New Bloom Labs. Hello, my fellow people of the plant. Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast. My guest today is Sage Howell, Vice President at Texas Hemp Cultivators. Sage Howell, what's up, man?
Man, just hanging out. It's another Friday, and I have nothing to complain about. What about yourself there, Kev?
Same here, man. We made it. It's been a long week, but excited to kind of unwind this weekend for sure.
Yeah, well, it's kind of unwind. Like going into the Super Bowl, it gets a little bit more chaotic. Like everybody's like, "Oh, you got to come to this party. You got to go to this party. You got to eat all this. You got to do all that." So unwind, I don't think so, man.
That's true. That's true. Who are you rooting for?
Okay, well, luckily for me, I have no dogs in this hunt, but it's kind of cool to see somebody that's like ageless win. So I'm kind of wanting Tom Brady to win because it's just a cool story. I mean, he went to a different division, won it out. He's happened to play the Super Bowl in the place that he lives and plays now. Let him have it. That's too cool of a story. And if not, awesome. Upset. Love it.
Right. I'm with you. I did have a dog in the fight initially, or in the playoffs. The Green Bay Packers ended up losing to the man Brady. And I've always been salty with Brady, to be honest, just because the guy's so good, right? And he's always winning. But I'm gonna stop the hate this Super Bowl because, like you said, he's done. I mean, in 1 year in Tampa is amazing what he's done with that team, and the fact that they're in the Super Bowl again. I gotta root for him this time. So
yeah, absolutely. I'm on the same page. It's cool to see that story like fold out and like go from there. So you can't hate it. You can't hate it at all. You just got to join it, that type of thing.
Absolutely, man. Yeah. So, hey, I'm excited to talk to you today. For those listening, like I mentioned, I have Sage Howell on. He's the vice president at Texas Hemp Cultivators. And what I'm excited about Sage is, on the podcast, I have guests on from all over the country or even the world, right? And It's nice to hone in here in Texas, which is where we reside, right? DFW area. So let's first talk about the Texas legislature, right? We know that they're meeting this session. I think they've already been in session for almost 3 weeks or a month now. But one of the top 5 issues is marijuana, right?
Yeah.
So while it's a stretch to say that we might see, full adult use this time around, like what are you expecting to come out of this session, and what are you hoping for?
Well, from my perspective, I always think of it as bird in hand is worth more than a bird, in the bush. So the idea is we just got our first inaugural hemp season out, all the problems and all the successes that went with that. Out of this session, sure, full legalization would be really beneficial to everybody. It would generate tax revenue. It would really help Texas get out of the recession that we saw in 2020 and give us a kind of a Corona stimulus package, as well as the tax revenues that would just be tremendous from marijuana legalization. But as a hemp farmer, again, I can't depend on something that hasn't happened yet, but rather building off of last season, I'd like to see that threshold of 0.3% THC go to 1% THC. So farmers can really hone in their craft and express these genetics that haven't had time to really be rooted in Texas, and granted an opportunity to really go a full term and grow these plants the way that they're supposed to be grown. So that's kind of the way I see it. But
And I might just pause you here every now and then. So I want to dive deeper
Mhm.
on that because
Sure.
we did see the final hemp rules issued, and I don't believe that
Oh,
they increased that threshold of zero point 0.3, right? So
oh, that's not good. Yeah, I guess so.
so let's talk about, like, for those that don't understand, like, why that's so important and why it's so difficult for these farmers to
Mm.
work within that threshold of zero point 0.3.
Absolutely. So the reason why it's so difficult to operate within that threshold is because there is a direct correlation with the amount of CBD production and expression a plant's genotype and phenotype has, comparatively and are directly related to THC. So if you get to those levels of CBD where, as a farmer, you're trying to produce a commodity amount of something. So you're trying to produce a high CBD so you can go get the money that you put into it and create a profit. Problem is, it's tied directly to that legal limit, which is zero point 0.3. If you're hitting the thresholds in which processors really want you to be at to generate a contract, to generate any type of sale, you're going to be looking at upwards of 12% CBD and higher. But once you hit those thresholds in the great state of Texas, we have a tremendous amount of heat and a tremendous amount of stress from the sun because you know how hot it gets here. It increases that THC level correlating exactly with that CBD level. So when I obviously, I can't, again, it goes back to my saying, can't hope for something that's not going to happen this year. But the hope was the higher you can get that legal limit of THC, the longer you can grow the plants to increase the profitability and increase the commodity value of the hemp plant. Because that's the whole point, is to get a standard crop that has certain marks, like hit those certain percentages without problems from the limits that we have right now. So I guess I got to say, you know, we didn't get that, but honestly, it's only going to hurt certain farmers that don't understand how to grow this plant and how to cut the season short so you can maximize the proficiency. But it's only hurting the industry, and that's the hard part about it.
Right, right. Yeah, and you've kind of seen that trend where
Mm.
some farmers have failed in that aspect, not just in Texas, but nationwide since the
Yeah,
2018 Farm Bill, right? I mean,
precisely.
yeah. So aside from that particular issue, and of
Hmm.
course, which would greatly benefit the farmer, right?
Hmm.
Is there any other issues that were or could be or on the table right now that you're kind of crossing your fingers for?
You know, unfortunately, you know, I don't know. That was one of the ones that was huge for me. And then obviously legalization, because the whole thing that we have accomplished as a company, I come from a food production background in agriculture. So essentially, what I've done is I've standardized how to produce greenhouse hydroponic crops. And with that being said, Kevin, what it is I had to adhere to food practices and standards of production so I can match what commercial growers are doing. And when I say commercial, I mean literally thousands of acres being grown and distributed every single day through Fresh Point, Cisco, Benny Heath, Brothers Produce, and those large produce distributors. So there was a learning curve to transition to hemp with those exact principles, but I wanted to carry them over. So I guess the long and short to answer your question, there needs to be more standardization, and that needs to happen from the top down. Unfortunately, from the government first, so we can get standard practices in place, eliminate bad players, and create a really solid market. Because as you know, it's kind of the wild west right now, huh?
Yeah, it definitely is. And that's a great point that you make in terms of this top down approach, right? So when you
Yeah.
say that, are you referring to it first really starting at the federal level, or is there something that the state level can do to kind of address some of these issues?
At federal level, to me, is just a guideline at this point for the states. Texas, if they wanted to be a leader, like they have said they wanted to be a leader, and like how they project Texas to be in this industry, they would create standards and they'd create regulations. And I know that word's a bad term for people, but it's really good when it comes to consumables and commodities because
Absolutely.
regulations allow for the industry to build within and to create infrastructure. So if Texas wanted to move in the direction I think they're gonna, again, assuming, shame on me, they would create boundaries from having states importing hemp flower in and allow the Texas farmers to build infrastructure and a market that would either be capped where you can't export it out, or have interstate commerce to where people are making tax revenue from a product being shipped in and then Texas products being shipped out of state. But so when I mean top down, I mean Texas legislation saying, okay, let's go to the rule of 1%. That's proposed. That's fine. That helps our industry. Let's go to standard practices. What does it look like? What does the season look like? Who are our players? Okay, let's go ahead and subsidize and create processors so we can have funnels and actually create jobs in a network so this product has somewhere to go. As you're seeing now, we're flush with product in every state that's producing hemp right now,
Yeah.
not just Texas. But that's not helping the Texas farmers because the ones that came into it anticipated what? Everybody wanted to buy their crops, everybody wanted their products, and they were anticipating not having problems. Well, with agriculture, problems are going to happen regardless if we want to or not. But the market still hasn't developed like we thought it was, and there's no local support. There's no local industry besides, the awesome nonprofits and then the Hemp Industry Association coming and trying to help. But there's no government support, there's no city support, and it's still kind of flying under the radar. And I think that's on us to go and educate people. But yeah, I hope I answered your question, Kev. It kind of went long-winded there.
No, it's a great answer. It really does tell a lot about what's happening in the current state
Mm-hmm.
of Texas, and it's a bit surprising to me. I mean, the fact that the 2018 Farm Bill passed and
Mm-hmm.
all these states, including Texas, submitted their plans to the USDA to begin operating, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like since that's happened, I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is that there's kind of just been a pause in terms of like really internally at the legislative level trying to set ourselves up for success here.
Yeah, and let me tell you, just my transition from the food side to the hemp and cannabis side that's in Texas. I don't know if this is true, but I think just in my head it's ringing right now. But I only think they hired 6 to 8 more people when they legalized the hemp bill. I believe there was 1,400 licenses issued or somewhere around that number. So 8 people now managing the great state of Texas and trying to regulate something like that. Obviously, there's going to be hiccups. But
Right.
I was stunned when I had a more rigorous audit for my GAP practices, so my good agricultural practices, which is through a Primus laboratory, which is in California, that regulates all national food distribution.
And
So
that's on
yeah,
the food side,
it's on the
right?
food side. It's on the
Right.
food side, which you would think,
Right.
food isn't federally regulated, but it's these standards that the market, free trade, free market have established as food distributors try to have, policies and insurance in place just to make sure they're covered, making sure they're getting the best possible product, and making sure that there's seed to sale transparency. And so I was stunned when my organic certification, my Primus Lab and GAP certification was more rigorous than my cannabis and hemp licensing process. And it was more rigorous in the form of I had people auditing me from the organics CCOF. I had people running from Primus to make sure I'm checking all these boxes. Literally from all the materials that I brought onto the farm, they audited to everything that I was doing in processing. None of that happened with the Texas Department of Agriculture when the rolling out of the hemp licensing happened. They did a background check, they checked your geospatial location, and then they came out 14 days before your harvest. So obviously there's a manpower issue there, and there needs to be regulation and standardization. So that's what I see as an opportunity.
Sure. And so, Sage, what do you think it is? Like, I mean, it's obviously not just Texas; it's
I
other
don't want to
states.
think.
It's at
Yeah.
it's at the federal level, right? So here's my question: is it a lack of understanding of this industry, which is could be, to be fair,
Let's go
right?
ahead.
Because we're all
Yep.
learning.
Yep.
Is it a lack of willingness to understand, like they
Hmm.
just don't want to, or is it that there's got other fish to fry and this maybe is not their top priority right now, or is it
Well,
all
let's go
three?
ahead.
Like,
Well, let's go ahead. You threw out 3. Let's throw out 4 and click D, all of the above, because that's what it is. I mean, it's hard to herd cats, but it's even hard to herd cats when they have government legislation to do as well. And so for us in the industry, it's just standardizing, writing down what you're doing, and creating practices that already are happening. Create parallels. Don't try to reinvent the wheel, because ultimately the problem with hemp and with cannabis in general is we all get this like, oh, it's such a magnificent thing. It's a crop, it's a plant, and it has components that are commodity, like they can be commodities. Let's create the infrastructure to regulate a commodity. Get the cannabis thing out of it. We're trying to regulate a commodity because there's adulteration that can happen. There's some lack of transparency that can happen, and there's interstate commerce that's going unchecked, and that's not helping your local governments, your local cities, and your statewide economies at that point. And that's for everybody, not just Texas in general.
Right, right. So, I mean, where do you see the future of Texas really thriving? Like, say, a perfect world. You mentioned the infrastructure, you
Hmm.
mentioned the collaboration
Sure.
between the experts, in the industry and
Yeah.
the policymakers. Like, we're a perfect world. Is Texas going to lead the industry in terms of industrial hemp for material goods, or is it going to be more on the cannabinoid CBD side,
Well,
or
I'm going to
both?
go ahead and burst a lot of people's bubble. I do not believe that Texas's climate is ideal, and so this is, I grew a great crop this year. I grew 16.3% CBG in an outdoor crop, and then 18% on an indoor crop.
16%
Yeah,
CBG. That's pretty
on an outdoor
good.
crop, it
Wow.
is, and I'm very proud of that. But I had a background of agriculture. It wasn't just like I'm going to go try these crops out. No, it was feeding them fish hydrolysate, but that's a completely different conversation. But to answer your question, long and short of it, we're going to be a leader in the industrial side. And the reason why I'm saying that, and what Texas Hemp Cultivators has done, is we positioned ourselves to do both. We understand that growing the show crop, the fun crop, the oil crop, is where you get traction. That's where you establish yourself. That's where you create credibility. The industrial side is where you're really growing it like you would a row crop, like you would do cotton, and you're going to throw a processor. Here's the obstacle that Texas has to meet and succeed and overcome, is creating a process facility or a processing facility that's localized on a railroad track and has a low barrier of entry, meaning a bunch of farmers could process and send their products there, and they have off takers for ready finished goods. So that means they're taking all the raw industrial hemp that we all know and love that doesn't have the THC that's going to get us crazy, or all the cannabinoids, whatever. They're taking it because they want to create an eco-friendly alternative to wood, to everything that we're
Right.
shipping from around the world
It's
here
the
to sustain
stock. It's
us.
the stock and fiber, right? Yeah.
Absolutely, that's what it is. So you have to create a centralized place for processing, offer fair prices, and then get large companies to create byproducts like tables, windows, or uh, frames, every little thing that can be replaced, like OSB board, non-structural lumber, to replace with a hempwood product or anything that we can come up with. And that's where we will be a leader, because Texas has a lot of space and a lot of land and a lot of row croppers that are just getting gouged by government subsidies. And they're not making money off of growing cotton anymore. They're not making money off of growing alfalfa anymore. And they need an alternative. And this could be a great flash in the pan for people that want to transition and do that. So,
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the land mass in Texas, you mentioned the weather, right? We talked about the
mhm.
struggle of staying within that 0.3 because of the Texas heat, right?
Yeah.
And the natural sun rays increase the threshold of THC in the plant.
Mhm.
It just makes sense. So yeah, and that infrastructure component is the biggest one. We need that in place before anything can happen, right? And
Absolutely.
that investment is what I mean, millions and millions of dollars, I would imagine.
Yeah, and that's what it is. And there's a couple facilities I know that's gotten like funding, but like a farmer, and the farmer and me, and side the businessman says, you don't bet the farm on something that you don't know what's going to happen. But the farmer and me wants to see these infrastructures be put into place, and then have reasonable contracts put down prior to me saying, all right, I'm going to flip 100 acres and I'm going to spend money on seed, labor, fuel, and fertilizer, and then have to harvest that. And then what if I don't have a market? What if this was a fly by night company? What if this doesn't actually have the contract sticking power like I thought it did? They sold me something, then they got out of Dodge. That's a lot of farmers that have had a bad 2020 season because of those things that have happened in the industry. And that's where the standardization comes in.
Mhm.
Trusted players that adhere to standards, that adhere to certifications, and go from there.
Mm-hmm. No,
Mhm.
that's a good point. Not just the processing capabilities and making sure that's in place, but then the supply chain itself, right? Who is going to buy your end product to produce whatever material goods they're wanting to do?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and and that's how a lot of farmers are kind of losing out on these deals, is that they're not having those contracts in place, whether it be on the industrial side or the
Mhm.
cannabinoid side.
Yeah.
Um, Go ahead.
No, no, no. One thing that, like, even shame on me, egg on my face, going into this season, I had tentative contracts put up, and I was very lucky I came from the food side because I knew how to go approach large commercial operations, large corporations, people that have standards that have been doing it and aren't as late to the game as Texas is, and they've moved in from out of town. So I had a little bit of a leg up, but there's a lot of farmers sitting on a lot of product and a lot of biomass. And they don't know what to do because they were told that if you grow it, they will come. And that's just not the case with anything. You've got to go do your diligence. And that's the unfortunate part about this industry is a lot of people are saying, oh, it's super easy to grow and you've got a huge market. And ultimately, no, you've got to do the marketing, you've got to do your homework, and you've got to know where your end use is, or at least have like a memorandum of understanding between two parties so you can move something at some point. But you know,
Yeah.
it is what it is.
How does this all shake out, Sage? Because like I can
How does
totally I can
okay.
totally agree with you because like I mean I have my own hemp brokerage firm, right? And
Yeah.
I represent a handful of farmers where I'm trying to help them sell their
Mhm.
high quality either CBG or CBD flower. And
Yeah.
first off, the prices are fluctuating all over the
Oh,
place, right?
I went to market with like, I want $600 a pound. And then I got,
Yeah.
no, you're not ever getting that. Who
Same.
told you that?
Same with me. Yeah,
Yeah, I
same
got
deal.
laughed out of like a bunch of Oregon forums, and I got laughed off of calls from California. Like, dude, we're shipping it out for $100.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh man, we're late. Texas is late. That's the gap right there. That's the learning curve that we all need to understand, and we need market support. And so I often think about it in terms of economics. If there's a lot of something on the market, the price is going to be driven down. If there's scarcity, the price will be driven down. I think there's opportunity based on the wildfires that happened last year and the pandemic for Texas to put themselves in a good position for 2021. But I think there's a lot more Texans that had licenses that got burned that are just saying, hey, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I'm not going to do
Right.
that again. And
Right.
so we'll see what happens. But there has to be, I'm going to keep going back to it for as much as I want to say I'm a libertarian. Put regulation on this industry so we can have a little bit more standardization.
Yes, and weed out the bad actors. Get those people
Oh,
out, you
get
know.
people from out of state that are just selling their flush stuff that was from 2019 here, and we have no way of regulating and no database that's standardized to be like, oh, this is that, this is this. Yeah, get them out. Absolutely, I completely agree with that.
100%. Yeah, yeah. We're on the same page, Sage.
Mm-hmm.
So let's switch gears and let's talk a
Sure,
little bit about the cultivation side of it, right?
absolutely, yeah.
Which is I know your bread and butter coming from the
Mm-hmm.
food side.
Yep.
So let's talk about first some challenges when you hear a lot about organic, right? Organic certification.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What are the true challenges when it comes to truly producing an organic product, especially cannabis?
Absolutely. So the reason why we pursued an actual certificate that it's a binding agreement. A lot of people throw these terms out, and you can see it on your grocery store shelves. You can see it anywhere you go, all natural, organic, seed to transparency. But until you actually peel back that onion and say, oh, well, they actually had a certifying body that is a USDA regulated industry that did their certification, and here's the audit. It's really hard because the cannabis industry, as you and I well know, is full of a lot of cowboys and a lot of pirates, and they want to get exactly what they want when they want it, and they'll say whatever they want to say to get that done, right? I didn't want to do that. Our whole principles when we were founding Texas Hemp Cultivators was we're doing it organically, which it's more difficult. It's harder. Texas is a huge state, and organics hasn't set itself up as a market. So I was taking a huge risk by doing that, but I wanted to do that to clear this, to be able to stand on this platform and say, hey, we're doing seed to sale. We're doing this the right way. This is where the market's going to go, or this is where I believe it should be. And I did, I felt a little bit of silliness and a little bit of remorse on that because a lot of people that I ended up going down the list of the Texas Department of Agriculture, calling hemp farmers and visiting with them and asking how their season went. They go, you did organic, why'd you do that? And as I heard that for the 50th time, I'm like, yeah, I kind of second guess it, but not at all, because it creates these, again, standard practices that are audited and they can be replicated. So the reason why I did organic is I believe it produces a healthier, more unadulterated crop. And so that was challenging in Texas because it was really challenging to get some of the materials I needed. And then it also created more work for me on the front end as a farmer.
Let me ask you just to dive deeper. So,
Sure.
because I'm curious, I don't know this, and I'm sure some of the listeners don't either. So, like
Sure.
when we talk about organic versus non-organic growing,
hmm
right? Like obviously, like you said, the standard's higher, right?
hmm
But like, what specifically
Let
are
me
the?
tell you.
Yeah.
So, organic is like by definition an organic. So, like the Organic Materials Research Institute lays out every single thing that can be applied to food crops and cannabis crops based on their chemical components. If it's not organically derived, it does not match organic certification. So if I'm using synthetic nutrients that are mined or from a salt source, I cannot be organic qualified because I'm not adhering to preserving cropland and preserving the ecosystem and the earth as a whole. I'm not taking byproducts, which organic is really is just reselling a byproduct and then putting it back into agriculture, putting it back into work versus I'm mining something, creating a new product, and then using it in agriculture. It's really kind of a conventional versus organic argument at that point because obviously we know Monsanto and all the buzzwords and all the negativity that comes with that. We need those things to grow crops, but there's a detrimental point where it's like, all right, we're really overdoing it with pesticides and we're starting to see the recoil from that with nitrogen runoff in our water supplies. Or
Right.
we're starting to see higher levels of cancer when we're growing in our croplands because we're spraying the crap out of them with fungicides. And so that's where it really comes down to. And so organics is just saying, hey, I'm not using pesticides, I'm not using fungicides, and I'm using more eco-friendly ways of growing my crops and
Gotcha.
adhering to those principles. And so it's just two different decision trees. And unfortunately, I kind of like organic's better because it's more natural. You can still do bad things in organic. Don't get me wrong. There's still like things like you can spray, gosh, what is it called? There's a really like harsh like pesticide that kills pests, but it has some residual effects that you could potentially use. I never use pesticides on anything that grows, and that's just a part of the CCOF stuff. But there's bad players in everything, and I hate to go that way, but it just is what it is.
Sure, sure.
Mhm.
And so you were talking, sorry to take you off, but that was helpful in
No,
terms of an
yeah.
explanation of really the criteria of becoming an organic grower.
hmm
So what other challenges are there when you're taking that path on organic growing?
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's a challenge of saying, okay, I can buy something off the shelf that I know is consistent and that is synthetic and that's going to deliver results like I want. But that doesn't really think about the long-term effects on your property and your land. The challenges with organic is being able to incorporate the things that are at your disposal, which I'll discuss how I took a lot of waste products from local coffee shops, from a dairy farm, and from other partners in Tarrant and Parker County to create a composting system, which is that's the bread and butter of organics. And so essentially, I can get into that right now. So organics is taking those natural materials, so chicken manure, cow manure, rock phosphate, fish hydrolysate, sometimes in some cases gypsum, and using those types of raw organic resources and then turning them into nutrients with controlled composting methods. And so I think one of
Can
the,
I
yeah,
ask
what's
you
up
can I
here?
ask you just one question? Sorry, don't forget where you're
Sure.
at. How do you
Yeah.
get chicken manure?
Oh, great question. So what I do, and if I don't know the answer, I try to figure it out. And if not, I'll default to somebody. But as I'm building out from start to finish, so looking at this like 30-yard view when I was like, all right, I haven't got any hemp crops in the greenhouse. How am I going to grow 3 acres outdoors? I need to build a living soil in the greenhouse and I need to do 52 rows outside. Where are they going to get nitrogen? Working backwards, I go, okay, I have a really good source of dairy manure. I would go get 25 yards in a trailer from a dairy farm in Comanche, Texas, and I'd compost it for a season. So that means getting it to a temperature of 212 degrees for 30 days so it can break down and become bioavailable outside. But getting to the chicken manure part is me calling a guy and going down to center Texas and East Texas and going to pick up 20 tons of pelleted chicken manure that are from all the factories that make us chicken that we know and eat in the
Wow.
state of Texas. Because
Wow.
that is like one of those things you got to think, all right, chicken or the egg argument, chicken or the poop argument. I need poop. Where do I go to get the poop? I got to go to where they're making chickens, baby. And that's what I did. And so like I drove out there, I called the guy, and I'm like, I know you guys. It's a commercial industry, so they, instead of like throwing stuff out or scraping this, they monetize it because it's a commodity. Nitrogen's a commodity.
Right,
Elements
right.
to grow food is a
Wow.
commodity. So I
Wow.
just went, called him. He has an organic certification because he doesn't use pesticides for any of his grows. And I'm telling you, this is corporation. This is like Big Tyson, big like that. They're called ViaTrack. Everybody who's growing next year, go to my dude center at ViaTrack in Texas. Get yourself a huge bag of poop and then go grow something awesome. But
You
no,
heard it.
and
You
so
heard it from Sage first. Yes.
but no, and so I went and got a commodity. I went to go get something I knew would work.
Right.
And so that's organic. You've got to get outside the box. Like you
So
can't be like,
right.
yeah.
So you got all those. Sorry, you got all those components, and you made this compost.
Oh, and I got so many more components. I got steamed bone meal from a like a giant bone, like because I needed calcium. I needed calcium in the soil, and I needed an available form of phosphorus. I had to go get 2 giant 4,000-pound bags full of essentially a byproduct processor has powdered bones where you can, it's bioavailable and needs to break down, and it's organic, and it's taking a waste product and turning it back into the soil without
Right.
having to mine,
No,
without
no
having to use
waste.
synthetics. No,
No
not
waste.
at all. Not
Yeah.
at all. That was
Wow.
interesting. Really gross. Like, so think about this, and I was out in the field and just covered in bone. Like it was just like I'm in dead bone. But it's cool. I feel good about it. Like it smelled like a forbidden milkshake. And I hope everybody understands what I mean by that. But like you would take it and it was like this powder. And it's like, oh, this is like whey protein. Probably because it really is like whey protein. But
Right.
yeah.
Right. Wow. So yeah. So I mean, so you can't. You got the bones. You got
all the
the
raw
chicken
ingredients,
all
raw
the
ingredients. Yeah.
and so that was kind of your start for the composting
And that's how I
process, right?
amended. Yeah. And so that's how I amended my compost because, again, getting to the nerdy side of it, organics is about controlling compost and having a good nitrogen and carbon ratio. So not only am I taking those things, which are rich in carbon, rich in phosphorus, rich in nitrogen, but I was also taking spent grain from breweries in Tarrant County and coffee grounds from coffee shops at like 32 tons. And I put it in a big pile, heated it up, and threw it on my field because my goal, again, I come from agricultural background, but my job, my bread and butter is energy. I liked to create and sustain energy in an efficient level. So in agriculture, I look at where somebody's waste could potentially be my gold. How can I turn it into that? And you know what it is? It's really just doing the work and showing up. So I'd go to coffee shops and I go, hey, I'm going to buy a trash bin for you. Can I be by once a week? And that added up to be, I think it was 6 tons. And then the spent grain is, hey, I've got a giant IBC tote. Can I put 2 here? Come pick it up with the trailer once a week.
Damn.
And it added up. And I'm like, man, I'm diverting all this waste from trash. I'm diverting this from that. And so that's what I believe organics to be. And that's what I believe, agriculture should go into. But that's a completely different conversation.
Sage,
But yeah.
I admire your hustle and hard work
Thanks.
ethic, man. That's like you said. I mean, that makes a lot of sense when you put it that way. It's really just doing the work.
There shouldn't be another way, and that's the silliest part about it, right? There shouldn't be another way, but we've often monetized and really capitalized on there's easier ways, but no, I mean everything's there. You just got to go get it, and it is harder work. That's for sure.
Well, and sometimes like the typical way in which we think about doing things can be more costly too, right? I mean, and we don't think about the added waste that we're kind of how wasteful we're being with certain byproducts that can be turned and used for other purposes.
Yeah, and I forgot I had overlap. There's a great mushroom farmer in Arlington. I think it's called Texas Fungus. I would go get all of his spent mushroom casings because that really adds to the carbon factor for your compost. And so that was another weird thing. So like it was funny at some given point, I had these sprouting like food mushrooms all over the farm. Thousands of like, have you ever seen them in the commercial bags?
I've seen them. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're huge.
Thousands of them. I had thousands of them just like in a pile. I'm like, what am I doing? What am I even doing? Am I losing it? Am I losing it here? But no, I wasn't. I had everything under control.
And these waste byproducts, like just from your background, like, do you know what these things will do in terms of helping with that organic, grow, or is it what you learn?
Yeah. So great question. Every single component can be broken down to an NPK or nutrient ratio. And so I would take what I would understand what they would do, give a little bit of a plus minus for me to like have some room for error for like percentages like lost into the atmosphere or lost into the ground or I couldn't control it, or the breakdown degradation of the elements. But I essentially ballparked it. I was like, all right, this poop, this poop essentially from the dairy farm has this kind of ratio. And I would actually send off a bag of manure to the Texas A&M extension. And then I go, okay, well, I can do a calculation based on the weight that I have, because every time I left the dairy farm, they had a scale. And I go, okay, if this is the percentage by volume here, let me extrapolate that to the amount estimated of tons I've saved from being wasteful. And then this is how much nitrogen I have. This is how much phosphorus I have. This is how much potassium I have. And I did that with every single component that I brought onto the farm. And so that
Wow.
allowed me to gauge, okay, this is how much this plant needs this season. This is how much I need to supplement. And then I would use fish hydrolysate after the planting to maximize those ratios to like fill in the gaps if I missed it. And so, yeah.
I'm like, my mind's like blown. Just kind of the efficiency and the organization and the hustle that you
Hey,
bring to the table,
between
man.
you and I, there
It's
wasn't a lot of organization. It was a lot of chaos that was controlled. You know what I mean?
well, it's
I
that
was like, oh, I got to go get this today. Yeah.
it's that controlled chaos, you know?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Failing forward is what I like to call it.
That's right. That's right. Fail, but fail fast.
Yeah, for
Exactly.
sure.
So let's talk. I know we touched on it a little bit at the beginning, but
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned
Sure.
stabilizing hemp genetics, and particularly in Texas, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that, being in Texas, does it present more challenges when it comes to stabilizing genetics, or is it?
Yeah. So it's always comes down to two things with your plant: is an ideal environment and what you can't control. So if I'm outdoors and I have an ideal environment, I'm good. But what I can't control is the weather and any kind of adverse reaction. So pests, uh, big animals, failed crops, things like that. Texas presents more than one challenge, not just because of the heat, but regulation. So growing a CBD crop is harder because of that process there. But growing a plant in general above 85 degrees is nearly impossible, because here's why. Plants do not grow after being exposed to 85 degrees. They survive through active transpiration. So that means that they're just trying to survive. They're trying to uptake water and cool their systems down. That's where that THC spike goes up and that CBD spike goes up. So in Texas, my initial goal for 2020 was to just find genetics that would thrive in the soils that I have. My property is divided between Frio clay and sandy loam. Clay has a high calcium exchange, and so it's kind of like it's mucky sometimes. But I grow cover crops out there, so it really breaks it up and creates an organic. It creates a lot of organic matter, which is just living organisms in the soil. So that helped me tremendously.
Mhm.
But back to the stabilization of the genetics. I grew a CBG crop because I was terrified of the CBD being not compliant from a different state. Because what do they care about me? Nothing. Nothing. If I don't have anything in writing, they don't care about me. They're
Right.
going to sell me something and be like, oh, I'm not going to answer that call ever again. And good luck for that guy finding me.
which
So
which happens a lot, right? Yeah.
oh, it happens way too often, way too frequently. And that's shame on the industry. But
Mm-hmm.
the point being is I grew CBG because I wanted to develop a vigorous strain or cultivar. And I wanted to see what these plants are capable of doing. Because let me tell you, Kevin, if we were to get somebody on the phone from a seed bank right now, we'd call them and we'd phone them into this conversation. They'd be like, "Oh, you'll get 12-foot plants." Have you been to Texas in July? Nobody's growing 12 feet in July. I can tell you that.
Right.
Even like bamboo, absolutely not. It's because plants stop growing after 85 degrees. So I was lucky to get 6-foot plants in the field, but that was because of the homework I did. That was because all the inputs I put outside. And that's because babying these plants with fish hydrolysate and getting them down in the right window. So back to answering the question is I identified a great CBG varietal that can withstand the Texas heat, that can produce 16.38%, and and
But what you're
be
saying
outside.
is the way you got there was everything that you explained in terms of what you curated initially for that
Yeah.
organic growth.
I identify. And so there's another process. I culled them out in the greenhouse. I'm very lucky to have a 1-acre controlled environment greenhouse. I took the ones that I thought were the most vigorous based on their expression in the greenhouse during their vegetative state, and I put those things outside. Everything else I babied in the greenhouse. So I identified a lineage that would perform in the heat that you found in the greenhouse and outdoors. I'm not saying every single one of my 6,000 plants did well. I'm going to say that this season I hit the mark of a 6 out of 10. And I'm going to really just say a 5 out of 10 because it was me. It is what it is. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you don't know what you don't know. And that was
Right.
my first time doing a commercial cannabis crop on 3 acres with just that tremendous amount of that heat, stress, and agricultural fun is what I like
Right.
to call it.
Well, I bet from all those learnings, I mean, you feel much more confident come next season, right? I mean, in terms of
Oh man, you don't, like I said, you don't know what you don't know. So moving into this season, oh, I love that drawing board moment where you're like, yep, not doing that crap again. Oh, that's the dumbest thing I've ever done. Oh, why'd you do that? To embarrass yourself. Great. And then, yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Right. Well, see that makes like myself and then other farmers that I'm talking with and even just Texas farmers in general, it should make them feel a bit better in terms of we were in our
Sure.
first grow season, right? I mean, there's learnings, there's dialing in, there's making
Yeah.
sure that there's trial and error. So they're not the only ones basically. Everybody's going through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really hard on myself, but like I always said, and I've said this before, if you're going into this venture, don't take it lightly. It's not a light thing to take. If you're doing 10 plants, great, awesome. Go get your license, go do everything the right way, standardize the industry. But if you're going in this venture and somebody's saying they want to get you 10,000 plants, ask why. And that's all you have to do. Just say why. Or think to yourself, like, Sage by himself had just a tremendous nightmare with 3 acres at 6,000 plants, and he only was successful with 60% of that, maybe 50% of those outdoor plants. What am I going to look like? And I have no agricultural background. I've never done that. And he was stressed out. I'm going to quit. I'm going to look at that and be like, I'm not doing that. And there was a little moment, Kevin, between you and I and everybody else listening, where I finished planting this stuff and I'm looking at the field and I'm sitting like there's a little roadway like where I would like move my equipment and like be able to have the utility vehicles and move like the fertilizers. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, I have done too much. This is going to be a fun summer. And I remember that epiphany.
Like bit off more than I could chew at this point.
Oh yeah, and you know what? I won't say that because I chewed it, but it was not fun. Let's just say like when you're a little kid and your parents are like, "Hey, you should probably take smaller bites." I for sure didn't do that as a grown adult, and shame on me. So
right. Hey, but you got a lot of good learnings out
done,
of it.
baby. Yeah, got it done. Zero stress now, right? No, that's not the case.
It's what goes back to that point of fail but fail fast. Hurry and fail.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Sage, you're very knowledgeable, man, and I've really enjoyed the insights. I want to give you the floor, and I want you to basically talk to two different audiences right now. Okay.
Okay.
The first is the Texas farmer. Okay.
Okay.
Approaching our second grow season with hemp.
Sure.
And then talk about at the state level in terms of our policymakers and kind of what they could do and what we could do together to make this one of the best industries in the country.
Absolutely. So to address the farmer that is either grown his first crop outdoors or indoors in a 2020 season, or let's just say they have had experience in California or Colorado and they're growing a hemp season, let's find a way to standardize our practices and create an inclusive market. That means if you're getting COAs from a different state, that's a joke. That's laughable. Let's go get buyers that are going to support local, just like you see with this movement with farm to table, just like you see with this craft beer movement. Let's piggyback those marketing ideas and do it together. Let's standardize processes. Let's cap our production. That's a huge deal. Cap your production, because let me say, out of all the licenses issued, there was a lot of people that didn't grow and there's a lot of people that failed, and Texas still made that revenue off the licenses. So now we're going to transition to the policy side. So farmers, let's all get together. Let's standardize the market. Let's create a marketing plan where it's not point against each other, but hey, you do this well. Let's group together and have a leader of this group, or let's group together and create a standardized product, or let's group together and not just do oil, but like do this. And let's work with retailers and get the retail relationship set up. And kind of just the CBD companies that move into town, let's work with them, but let's try to say, hey, we can match the pricing that you're getting from out of state. And that sucks, but it's just something that has to be done to standardize the market to get Texas going. From a policy side, It's just that. It's enforcing standard practices. It's saying, hey, if you're moving into this state and you're doing business, this is what agricultural production looks like. This is what the food distribution side looks like. Let's take a page from the food distribution side. Let's take a page from Washington and the cannabis production side, and let's put them together and let's reissue licenses with higher standards and regulated practices with transparency. And that means audits that the farmers do and report back to a centralized location where those regulatory policymakers can have a better understanding of what it's doing. Because again, this plant is wonderful. It's a mysterious and wonderful thing to be around. It is completely different than any other plant. But all that aside, it's being produced for a product, a commodity. So we need to standardize it like that and stop getting rid of the stigmas. I can take a bunch of barley and turn it into a bunch of beer whenever the hell I want. But I don't get regulated as much as a cannabis thing, and I can't take it to market. Let's think about it that way. It's like, okay, well, you can take a bunch of hemp and do whatever you want with it, but if we don't have any practices, we don't know what's going on, foul play can happen, adulteration can happen, and that's inexcusable from a policy side. So let's go ahead and move the ball up the percentages, create a standard market, and regulate interstate commerce somehow, some way.
Mic drop. Boom.
Walk away. That's it. And then they're now hopefully, I hope no policymakers come and approach me now, because I'm gonna be like, I do not want to deal with that right now. Not a chance. Don't put me on Capitol Hill.
But I mean, people that probably would, you know what I mean? So at least it would start the conversation. Yeah,
so. Absolutely. We definitely got to kick it into the realm of like, okay, we're making a commodity. It's cool. Cannabis is great. It's got a wonderful lore. I love it. I use it, but it's a commodity. It needs to be standardized because it helps people. And it also has the ability to hurt people if it's not regulated. And so like that means farmers going into it and not having a market, people dumping life savings and cash into it, people getting products that aren't cannabis, and we have no way of testing it because there's no regulation, and they're getting them from out of state.
Right.
Where do we go from there?
It's almost like it's set up for failure, but what's keeping it alive.
I wasn't gonna say that, but Texas kind of did a really tongue-in-cheek way of saying, well, if it fails, we made our money.
Well, and I want to follow up with that and saying but there are the good actors out there that are adhering to those standards, and they're keeping keeping it alive basically. And, because again, regulatory compliance is going to come. It's inevitable. So the ones that are positioned, that are already operating right, it's going to be business as usual. The ones that aren't are going to get weeded out.
Absolutely, and I'm looking forward to those days. Those are going to be remarkable, and they're going to happen sooner than we anticipate, and that's going to be great.
Me too. We'll have a beer when that happens, Sage.
Love that for us. It's funny, and this is a weird tangent. There's a local brewery that used my hemp in one of their micro beers.
Nice.
It's called False Idol Brewing Company, and they came out with like a test pilot. We're still trying to figure it out, and I got to say, it's pretty good. It's in North Richmond Hills. I think if you've got a chance, go over there and check out those guys. And it's those things. It's getting out of the box. It's like, all right, oil's great, but how do we get people that would never think about cannabis to be like, oh, that's a craft beer, that's a craft farm, I'll drink that.
Right.
It's safe. Yeah.
It's the stigma that's been attached to the plant for so long.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
But that stigma is quickly being removed, and it's because of conversations that we're having and experts like you who are sharing your insights. So I thank you again so much, Sage, for coming on. I got a ton out of it. I know the listeners did. And before we wrap up, where can people find Texas Hemp Cultivators, their website, social media, and yourself as well?
Oh, okay. Awesome. So I'll just leave my social media. It's super funny. It's called Sage Grows. And then obviously my name's Sage Howell, and you can check me out on Instagram, Facebook, anywhere. Feel free to shoot me a DM. We can start a dialogue. I really appreciate that. Thank you for the audience. And also, you can find Texas Hemp Cultivators at texashempcultivators.com. And it's the same for Instagram, same for Facebook. And we have a slew of wonderful products that are farm to table with seed to sale transparency, from literally you can look at when I planted the plants to the processing to the COAs that are verified by New Bloom Labs, which is another great company here in Texas from Tennessee. And they're doing an awesome job standardizing and making sure that the hemp industry is held accountable. But you can find us online. Please send me an email, send me a DM. I'd love to connect with any of your audience.
Awesome. Yeah. Shout out to the New Bloom Lab guys. Jesse Kearns and John Kearns. Shout out to the brothers. Awesome. Hey man,
Awesome.
well let's run it back after the legislature, the session after
Dude,
they're over, and
totally.
let's talk about kind of what all comes of that,
What
and the.
didn't happen? We'll talk about what didn't happen. Yeah,
I
no
didn't
big
want
deal.
I didn't want to say it. You did,
I'll
but
say it.
hey.
I'll say it. Shame on me, right?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
It's the truth. But
Yeah.
hey, it's the world in which
It's
we live
going,
in.
but we're here for the burn, and I'm good for it.
That's right. Awesome. Well, hey, thanks again, Sage, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Bye bye.
Bye.